Thumbs up. See it? Welcome, welcome. Got about a minute, maybe 30 seconds, and then we'll start. Quick recap, and then probably finish. Probably. We shall see. Cool. Okay, here we go. The last thing, just a quick recap. Despereaux was being led by Botticelli to where he says the princess is. So let's see what happens. Chapter 48, on the tail of a rat. Have you ever had hold of the tail of a rat? At best, it's an unpleasant sensation, scaly, cold, similar to holding onto a small, narrow snake. And at worst, when you are dependent upon a rat for your survival, and when a part of you is certain that you're being led nowhere except to your death, it is a hideous sensation, indeed, to have nothing but a rat's tail to cling to. Nonetheless, Despereaux held on to Botticelli Remorso, and the rat led him deeper and deeper into the dungeon. Despereaux's eyes had, by this point, adjusted quite well to the darkness, though it would have been better if they had not. For the things that he saw made him shiver and shake. What did he see? He saw that the floor of the dungeon was littered with tufts of fur, knots of red thread, and the skeletons of mice. Everywhere there were tiny white bones glowing in the darkness, and he saw in the dungeon tunnels through which Botticelli led him, the bones of human beings too, grinning skulls and delicate finger bones rising up out of the darkness and pointing toward some truth that's best left unspoken. Despereaux closed his eyes. But it didn't help. He saw, as if his eyes were still open wide, the bones, the tufts of hair, the knots of thread, the despair. Ha ha, exactly. Botticelli laughed as he negotiated the twists and turns. Oh, yes, exactly. What's this guy talking about? If what was in front of Despereaux was too horrible to contemplate, what followed behind him was perhaps even worse. Rats. A happy, hungry, vengeful parade of rats, their noses up in the air, sniffing. Mouse! Sang one rat joyfully. Oh, yes, mouse, agreed another, but something else too. Soup, called another rat. Yes, soup, the others agreed. Blood, sang a rat. Blood, they all agreed together. And then they sang, here, mousy, 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 here, little mouse. Botticelli called out to the other rats. Mine, he said. This little treasure is all mine. The gentlemen and ladies, please, I beg you, do not infringe on my discovery. Mr. Remorso, said Despereaux. He turned and looked behind him and saw the rats, their red eyes and their smiling mouths. He closed his eyes again. He kept them closed. Mr. Remorso? Yes, said Botticelli. Mr. Remorso, said Despereaux, and he was crying now. He couldn't help it. Please, the princess. Tears, shouted the rats. We smell tears. Mousy, we smell your tears. Excuse me. Please, shouted Despereaux. Little friend, said Botticelli. Little Despereaux Tilling. I promised you, and I will keep that promise. The rat stopped. The rat looked ahead of you. Oh, excuse me. Look ahead of you, he said. What do you see? Despereaux opened his eyes. Light. Exactly, said Botticelli. A light. Chapter 49. What do you want, Miggery Sow? Again, reader, we must go backward before we go forward. We must consider for a moment what had occurred with the rat and the serving girl and the princess down in the dungeon before Despereaux made his way to them. And what happened was this. Roscuro led P and Meg deep into the dungeon to a hidden chamber, and there he directed Meg to put the princess in chains. Gore, said Meg, she's going to have a hard time learning her lessons if she's all chained up like this. Do as I say, said Roscuro. Maybe, said Meg, before I lock her up, her and me could switch outfits, so we could start it already with her being me and me being a princess. Yes, said Roscuro. Certainly. A wonderful idea, Miss Miggery. Princess, take off your crown and give it to the serving girl. The piece sighed and took off her crown and handed it to Mig. And Mig put it on and slid immediately right down her small head and came to rest quite painfully on her poor, abused cauliflower ears. It's a biggish thing, she said, and quite painful. Well, well, said Roscuro. How do I look? Mig asked, smiling down at him. Ridiculous, he said. Laughable. Mig stood, blinking back tears. You mean I don't look like a princess? She said to the rat. I mean, said Roscuro, you will never look like a princess, no matter how big a crown you put on your tiny head. You look exactly like the fool you were and always will be. Now, make yourself useful and chain the princess up. Dress-up time is over. Mig sniffed and wiped at her eyes, and then she bent to look at the pile of chains and locks on the floor. And now, princess, he said, I'm afraid that the time for your truth has arrived. I will now tell you what your future holds. As you consigned me to darkness, so I consign you to a life spent in this dungeon. Mig looked up. Ain't you going upstairs to be a serving maid? No, said Roscuro. Well, ain't I going to be a princess then? No, said Roscuro. But I want to be a princess. No one, said Roscuro, cares what you want. As you know, reader, Miggery Sow had heard this sentiment expressed many times in her short life. But now, in the dungeon, it hit her full force. The rat was right. No one cared what she wanted. No one had ever cared. And perhaps worst of all, no one ever would care. I want, cried Mig. Shh, said the princess. Shut up, said the rat. I want, Mig sobbed. I want. What do you want, Mig? The princess said softly. Eh? Shouted Mig. What do you want, Miggery Sow? The princess shouted. Don't ask her that, said Roscuro. Shut up. Shut up. I'm sorry, not you, them, the reader, the book, the rat. But it was too late. The words had been said. The question at last had been asked, and the world stopped spinning, and all of creation held its breath, waiting to hear. What was it that Miggery Sow wanted? I want, said Mig. Yes, shouted the pea. I want my ma, cried Mig, and into the silent, waiting world. I want my ma. Oh, said the princess. She held out her hand to Mig. Mig took hold of it. I want my mother too, said the princess softly, and she squeezed Mig's hands. Stop it, shouted Roscuro. Chain her up. Chain her up. Gore, said Mig. I ain't going to do it, and you can't make me do it. I got the knife, don't I? She took the knife and held it up. If you had any sense at all, said Roscuro, I would hardly doubt that you do. You will not use an instrument on me. Without me, you will never find your way out of the dungeon. And you will starve to death here, or worse. Gore, said Mig. Then lead us out now, or I will chop you into little rat bits. No, said Roscuro. The princess shall stay here in the darkness, and you, Mig, will stay with her. But I want to go upstairs, said Mig. I'm afraid. Oh, I'm afraid that we're stuck here, Mig, shouted the princess, unless the rat has a change of heart and decides to lead us out. There will be no change of heart, Roscuro said. None. Gore, said Mig. She lowered the knife. And so the rat and the princess and the serving girl sat together in the dungeon as outside the castle. The sun rose and moved through the sky and sank into the earth again, and night fell. They sat together until the candle had burned out and another one had to be lit. They sat together in the dungeon. They sat and sat. And reader, truthfully, they might be still sitting there today if a mouse had not arrived. Chapter 50, in which the princess says his name. Princess, Despereaux shouted. Princess, I have come to save you. The Princess P heard her name and she looked up. Despereaux, she whispered, and then she shouted, Despereaux! Reader, nothing is sweeter in this sad world than the sound of someone you love calling your name. Huh? Imagine that. Nothing. For Despereaux, the sound was everything. He lost his tail, his trip to the dungeon, and back out of it and back into it again. He ran toward the princess, but Roscuro, baring his teeth, blocked the mouse's way, and the princess cried, Oh no, rat, please, don't hurt him. He's my friend. Mig said, Don't worry, princess. I will save the Misi. She took the kitchen knife and she aimed it to cut off the rat's head, but she missed her mark. Whoopsie, said Miggery Sow. Ah! Screamed Roscuro. He turned to look at where his tail had been, and as he did, Despereaux drew his needle and placed the sharp tip of it right where the rat's heart should be. Don't move, said Despereaux. I will kill you. Botticelli laughed from the sidelines. Exactly. He slapped his tail on the floor in approval. Absolutely delightful. A mouse is going to kill a rat. Oh, all of this is much better than I anticipated. I love it when mice come to the dungeon. Let me see, the other rats pushing and shoving to come to the front. Stand back, Botticelli told them, still laughing. Let the mouse do his work. Despereaux held the trembling needle against Roscuro's heart. The mouse knew that as a knight, it was his duty to protect the princess. But would killing the rat make the darkness go away? Despereaux bowed his head ever so slightly, and as he did so, his whiskers brushed against the rat's nose. Roscuro sniffed. Wait, what does that smell? He asked. Mouse blood, shouted one rat. Blood and bones, shouted another rat. You're smelling of tears, said Botticelli. Tears and a thwarted love. Exactly, said Roscuro. And yet there's another smell there. He sniffed again, and the smell of soup crashed through his soul like a great wave, bringing with it the memory of light and the chandelier, the music and the laughter, everything, all the things that were not and would never and could never be available to him as a rat. Soup, moaned Roscuro, and then he began to cry. A boo, shouted Botticelli. Hissed the other rats. Kill me, said Roscuro. He fell down before Despereaux. It will never work. All I wanted was some light. That is why I brought the princess here, really, just for some beauty, like some light for me, some light of my own. Please, shouted Botticelli, do kill him. He is a miserable excuse for rat. No, Despereaux, said the princess. Don't kill him. Despereaux lowered his needle. He turned and looked at the pea. A boo! Shouted Botticelli again. Kill him! Kill him! All of this goodness is making me sick. I've lost my appetite. Gore! Shouted Mig, waving her knife. I'll kill him. No, wait! Said the princess. Roscuro! She said to the rat. What? What? He said. Tears were falling out of his eyes and creeping down his whiskers and dripping onto the dungeon floor. And then the princess took a deep breath and put a hand on her heart. I think, reader, that she was feeling the same thing that Despereaux had felt when he was faced with his father begging him for forgiveness. That is, P was aware suddenly of how fragile her heart was, how much darkness was inside of it, fighting always with the light. And she did not like the rat. She would never like the rat, but she knew what she must do to save her own heart. And so, here are the words that the princess spoke to her enemy. She said, Roscuro, would you like some soup? The rat sniffed. Don't torment me, he said. I promise you, said the princess, that if you lead us out of here, I will get cook to make you some soup, and you can eat it in the banquet hall. Speaking of eating, one of the rats shouted, Give me the mouse! Give us the mousie! Yeah, shouted another one, Hand over the mouse! Who would want them now, said Botticelli. The flavor of here will be ruined. All of that forgiveness and goodness, blech. I, for one, am a-leaving. Soup in the banquet hall? Roscuro asked the princess. Yes, said the pea. Really? Truly, I promise. Gore, shouted Mig. Soup is illegal. But soup is good, said Despereaux. Yes, said the pea. Isn't it? The princess bent down before the mouse. You are my knight, she said to him, with a shining needle, and I am so glad that you found me. Let's go upstairs. Let's eat some soup. And reader, they did. Chapter 52, Happily Ever After. Ever heard that before? Look at that. But the question you want answered, I know, is did they live happily ever after? Yes and no. What about Roscuro? Did he live happily ever after? Well, the Princess P gave him free access to the upstairs of the castle, and he was allowed to go back and forth from the darkness of the dungeon to the light of upstairs. But, alas, he never really belonged in either place. I'm afraid of those whose hearts break and then mend in crooked ways. But the rat, in seeking forgiveness, did manage to shed some small light and a little bit of happiness onto another life. How? Roscuro, reader, told the princess about the prisoner who had once owned a red tablecloth, and the princess saw to it that the prisoner was released, and Roscuro led the man out of the dungeon and to his daughter, Miggery Sow. Mig, as you might have guessed, did not get to be princess, but her father, to atone for what he had done, treated her like like a princess, for the rest of his days. But her father, to atone for what he did, to make up for what he did, treated her like a princess for the rest of his days and her days. And what about Despereaux? Did he live happily ever after? Well, he did not marry the princess, if that's what you mean by happily ever after. Even in a world as strange as this one, a mouse and a princess can't be married. But reader, they can be friends. And they were. Together, they had many adventures. Those adventures, however, are another story. In this story, I'm afraid, we must now draw to a close. But before you leave, reader, imagine this. Imagine an adoring king and a glowing princess, a serving girl with a crown on her head, a rat with a spoon on his head, all gathered around a table in a banquet hall. In the middle of the table, there was a great big kettle of soup. And sitting in the place of honor, right next to the princess in a tiny chair, was a small, very small mouse with big ears. And peeking from behind a dusty velvet curtain, looking in amazement at the scene before them, are 4 other mice. Mon Dieu, look, says Antoinette. He lives, and he sees like such a happy mouse. Forgiven, whispers Lefter. Cripes, said Furlow. Unbelievable. Just so, says the Threadmaster Hovis, smiling. Just so. And reader, it is just so, isn't it? The end. That's it. That's the book. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll catch you on the next stream. Peace. Take care of yourself. Take care of your families. Bye-bye.